Hi, Tad.
Hey, Nick. I was gonna let's see. Yeah, we can just leave it like this. Um, so you have written a remarkable book. I think I'm not sure of any other book that exists. There are books that exist like this for Shakespeare. There are books that exist like this for Jane Austen, Charles Dickens, and a bunch of other writers. But I don't know of any other books that exist like this for Jules Verne. Um, you have in your book an essay for every book that Jules Verne wrote, and um, in addition, 27 essays in the book, some of them about Jules Verne's literary techniques, some of them about Jules Verne's values. Some of them are very deeply personal and revealing essays about your own personal struggles. And the essays about Verne's books are not just plot summaries. They are essays about your reactions to the books as you read them. And we're here mostly to talk about Jules Verne, but your book is an amputee's guide to Jules Verne, and I think both parts of the title are important: the amputee's guide and Jules Verne. And so I wanted to talk about amputee's guide. I wanted to talk about you a little bit also. Um, you were a bookseller for 50 years, right?
Absolutely.
All of those for University of Washington,
University Bookstore.
University Bookstore.
We had a branch on campus. So
Okay,
I was the guy who bought the books for the campus branch of the store.
okay. And you had a feature called Nick's Picks.
And that was throughout the bookstore. Pretty soon, all the different branches were sharing it as a promotion. Exactly. I would choose what I thought was the one best book that might get overlooked and give it the personal push that a bookseller could give it, and make signage for it and make leaflets for it and have a book club that discussed it at the end of the month.
Yeah. And you also were very physically active. You were a runner. You ran 2 miles at a time. Oh, in case people don't know, you live in Seattle,
You?
which is a very hilly place. If people haven't been there, I remember I was in Seattle once, and I was very struck by the fact that to get to one level of Seattle to another, um, there was actually a city-owned and managed elevator on the street to get from one part of the street to another. Anyway, uh, so very anyway, just to set the scene, and then something very unfortunate and very tragic happened. Um, that changed your life. I'd like you to describe that experience also.
It came out of left field. It's something. You know how life can just take a turn suddenly. In fact, one of the reasons I'm going to just be really frank and tell you guys the truth is yesterday a dear friend of mine was just crossing the street to work and was hit by a car and killed out of nowhere. It can
Yeah,
happen. And there's not always warnings ahead of time. There was none for me. I went walking every day down to a lovely park in my neighborhood and fed the crows. And I had friends that went with me. And one day I got up from my reading chair to go, and I fell over. And I couldn't figure out what was wrong with my leg. I thought it had gone to sleep, except I couldn't quite get it to come back. I managed to get to my cell phone and asked my friend to come to my house. And she convinced me against my will to call 911. I would have done it for my dog. but I thought, no, I'll come out of this. It's nothing. It's nothing. Well, what had happened is a blood clot came loose behind my knee and killed the leg. And sitting there reading my book, I didn't know. And I ended up weeks and weeks in the hospital. I had 6 operations. trying to save the knee. Finally, they gave up and lost it. So all of a sudden, with no warning, I was a guy with one leg.
And I mean, apart from the pain and all of the associated things that came with that, one of the things that you talk about in your book is the loss of mobility as being one of the hardest things to adjust to, and that leads directly into Jules Verne.
It
Um,
does.
and one of the other things that you talk about in the book is your struggle to try to find the rules for dealing with being an amputee, and suddenly finally coming to the realization that there are no rules, there are only hacks.
It was
um,
a revelation.
yeah,
I wouldn't have got it if I hadn't gone to this amputee support group and just hearing them talk. I kept waiting for the facts. This is how you do it. If you fall out of your chair, you do this, and then you do that. And instead, it's always you play the situation, what things are around you. It's
yeah,
I it was humbling. You
yeah.
learn.
And one of the things that was around you was a copy of the Golden Volcano that you'd had for 14 years that was just sitting on your bookshelf. And it just happened to be at eye level when you rolled around to your bookshelf in your wheel. And one thing led to another.
What a lucky
Yeah.
coincidence.
And it was the translation by Rick Walter, if I remember correctly. It was
Baxter, isn't it?
oh
Is
yeah,
it?
wait, was it Everett Baxter?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, well, that's right. Rick Walter did the Hunt for the Meteor with
Yes.
Walter
The
Miller, right?
meteor hunt.
Yeah, the Meteor Hunt. And you gradually you started writing summaries for yourself, and then you started publishing them on Facebook in
Well, that's
the
just a way of keeping my memory fresh. I'll tell you, getting older, memory is an issue. And sometimes these things go through my head. I told Pat I was a little uptight. I thought he'd remember my book summaries better than I would. That's why I write it down, is that
yeah,
way it's there. Uh,
yeah,
and uh, and that was the impulse. It was sort of Hansel and Gretel leaving breadcrumbs. I wanted to not just whiz through these books, but I wanted to be able to go back and say, it was 800 leagues on the Amazon. That's the one about the guy
yeah.
who can't go back to, and I can put it together again.
Yeah, personally, I can't tell the difference between the Amazon and the Orinoco, but that's
Yeah, sometimes they're so similar, and
true.
there are similar
Right.
elements.
Yeah,
Which one had the funniest professor? Because there's
yeah,
often the professor, and then
yeah,
there's the young guy who's learning, and then
yeah,
there's usually the helper who can do amazing things.
yeah, yeah. And the characters usually come by threes.
They by threes. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's a great combo. It works.
yeah, yeah. And one of the people in your amputee support group finally made the observation that one of the reasons why you seemed to be coping better than a lot of the people in the group was because you had discovered Jules Verne therapy.
it was not even my idea, I gotta say.
Yeah. And you were getting positive when you began sharing the reviews, or the notes that you were writing up, began getting positive feedback. You came up with the idea of possibly publishing um, the reviews.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I am even still, even though I'm not working in the bookstore still, I'm a book evangelist. I can't be around people that read without trying to get them to read the best books they can. All I feel like is there's this ticking clock, and you never know what car is waiting around what corner for you. And
yeah,
and so given that, why waste your time when there are great books out there to read? So many Jules Verne novels are ignored, and there's so many good ones out there that, especially for you folks that are in the club, you know,
yeah,
what is Jules Verne if it's not the text of his novels? That's
yeah,
it. That's who he is.
I think it's a wonderful book. I mean, there's probably other people in this room who are in the same group that you're in, people who've read everything that Jules Verne wrote, but I'm not one of them. I've read fewer than half. And I'm very grateful that I have a guidebook now that I can read through
That's it.
these essays and decide from that which one I want to read next. Um, so I have some notes here. So let me get my iPad up here and take a look at this.
Great pen.
Um, so let's talk about Jules Verne a little bit. You have some observations that you made about Jules Verne's values, some things that you picked up about his values, how he felt about people, um, and I think some of the things that you said about him, I felt light bulbs going off in my head as I was reading. And one of the things that you talked about was his decency and um, his the value that he placed on duty, and how often the idea of people doing their duty came up.
Chokes me up. It's one
Yeah,
of his very subtle values that you can write off as a cliche. It was nothing, ma'am. It was just doing my duty. But isn't for him. For him, it's your essential commitment to the social contract, what you owe to the other human beings you're living with. And there's this code, and he really lives by it in a kind of beautiful way. It's expected, the way that it's not in our modern horrifying era, the way it's just utterly ignored. Duty is it's a beautiful concept.
and there's a lot. There is a lot of male bonding in his books. I mean, some of this may have been the intended audience, but there's also a deeply felt sense that male friends allow themselves to cry for each other uh, when people are in distress.
Yeah.
Uh, they are openly affectionate. Um,
In ways that are embarrassing to me
yeah,
today with today's codes. I go, oh my God, are you kidding? They were holding hands that whole time.
yeah,
It's just like they are so openly affectionate. It's made me question my uptightness as I try to be as liberal as possible. I notice that his men are so openly affectionate that it makes me realize how I'm not.
yeah, yeah. And there are also there are very few women, I think, who are major characters in Verne, but among the women that are in his books, you point out that some of them are very strong. Um, they have a lot of agency. Nadia in Michael Strogoff is attacked by a bear. What does she do? She doesn't scream for help. She takes a rifle and puts two bullets
Yeah, yeah,
in the bear's
God,
head.
she's not
Problem
the only
solved.
one. God, women who shoot bears in the head are one of his things.
Yeah. But also the idea that part of what allows the women to be strong and to flourish is the fact that the men are not coming on to them.
It's I just I remember when my professor said that the Christian God was the only God who didn't have a penis in the ancient world, that there was just a swirling cloud down there. And in Jules Verne, that is often the case. I don't think there's any character who ever expressed lust except for a guy in Jules Verne's very first book, which he probably wrote as a teenager, in which the villain wants to get with the prostitute who's called Death's Head.
Yeah,
It's not very erotic.
yeah. So you said earlier today you had some books on your table. You had pulled some books down. So
I did.
let's talk about the books that you picked out. Some
Well,
of your favorite.
I am amused
A little
that
bit of such.
that this hearing you guys discuss it was fantastic. This is the modern edition that they said was coming out, and this guy Jared Bendis makes a point. This book means something to him, and anyway, in the same way. that I thought the Truman Show was a good image for America. This game of America is it works to me. It's a fascinating the way Jules Verne feels about America and Americans was an essay in itself in my book because he loves us. He thinks Americans are the neatest thing, and watching him try to be American in many ways is one of the things that's delightful about him. I want to say Rick Walter's version of 5 Weeks in a Balloon is one of the reasons I fell in love with him. I wanted to read the book that made him famous. And 5 Weeks in a Balloon, when you read it, you understand why. You go, this comes out of left field. It's fantastic. Now, I hear you guys talk, and you guys talk in these mathematical terms that are way beyond me. I'm down at the literary end is where I'm at characters and plot. For that, the way he keeps my attention, what a skill he has. He doesn't let it waver. He picks up one thread, drops it, picks another one up. He's he's a cagey, smart, and generous writer. Mighty Orinoco is one of the reasons that I started this whole project because it just looked really exciting. And I went, really? South America? And then it's got this fantastic surprise embedded in it, which I can't reveal and still look you in the eye. But 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 midway through, there's a real jaw dropper, and it's one of those things that Jules Verne does so nicely because he's in control from the beginning.
It's very interesting in that book the way Walter James Miller, in the introduction to the Mighty Orinoco, dances around the surprise in the plot.
That's
Tries to
really
hint at that
kind.
actually. Yeah.
I think it's kind. Surprise is underestimated in books, and to give away Jules Verne's surprises, I'm just it's I respect that. Uh, this the Sydney Sydney
Sidney Kravitz.
Kravitz, this big old version of Mysterious
I remember
Island.
that.
You know, as a book
That.
lover, it's so big and it's so great to hold, and it's got all the pictures. It's such great detail. And this man, they say, learned French because he wanted to translate Mysterious Island. It was his life passion. And you feel like you're reading something that's the sum work of you feel how much love that man put into this story. It's if there's one Jules Verne book that knocks my head through every time I read it, it's Mysterious Island.
I can't tell you how thrilled I was when I walked into Barnes and Noble and saw that sitting on the shelf. I had corresponded with Sidney Kravitz. I think it was sometime in the 1990s, and he had sent me a copy of that on as a Word document on a disc.
Wow.
3.5 inch floppy.
3.5 inch floppy with a paper in the envelope that had a map of Lincoln Island,
which I think Verne drew.
Yeah.
Himself.
Yeah. So
It's a work of love.
oh God, it was so wonderful.
You're lucky when you hit a translator like that. William Butcher's another one. You know, there are some authors, I mean, some translators that really, really want you to get Verne. And I'm starting to tell the difference. Wesleyan puts out a great line of books, and I'll tell you, for me, one of the shockers was the Kip brothers. It was, do I like this book? It messed with my mind brutally. It's a mental shocker, and maybe it isn't really science, but it's a vision of how people interact, and watching these two brothers walk into the middle of this plot that's way beyond them. Oh, the courtroom scene takes like half the last part of the book. It's dark, and fascinating. It's a study of a murder. Uh, I,
Yeah.
all I can
So,
say is I've never read a book like the Gipp Brothers. What
yeah.
an experience! And to think that the same guy who wrote all the books that we love, this is just another one of the many throwaways that are
Yeah.
there that people don't know about.
Well, your book put that one on my list.
And that's the only translation at this point, right?
Yeah.
That
That
was the
that's
first
the only
book.
one that I saw, and it's so well done. Wesleyan, all of their illustrations are crisp. You can see the detail, and their texts. They always choose the best people to get to do the translating. It's utterly a shame that they stopped after 8 books. Boy, did they do a good job. Uh, I have just a few left that I'll tell you about that I love. Uh, this one called A Priest in 1835.
Yeah.
It should be called The Bell of St. Nicholas. And it is a story. It's his first, and I'll tell you, it's a, if I just say that instead of a last chapter, the last chapter, instead of an ending, you go back and get a new vision of the beginning. I've never had the experience that Jules Verne cooked up as a teenager in his very first book. Uh, Amazingly under evaluated. Uh, Later, but really charming, Golden Danube. It's a story of a friendship. It's a story of guys who fish and a fishing contest, and a guy who's really good and a guy who might be up to something. And it's almost like the secret sharer. You feel like, what is this turning into? But I won't reveal the twists and turns that Jules Verne takes. It's a story about men opening up to friendship. It was a deep and a funny story. Really like this one.
I poo-pooed all those advertisements they do for river cruises on PBS until after I read the book. Now I want to go.
You know, the Earth turned upside down.
Oh, that's a
It's
wonderful satire.
it's it's like Doctor Strangelove. It's just like you watch people that you like in earlier books, and they decide they want to buy the North Pole. Uh, but what they want to do is they want to tip the Earth onto a different axis, and they've got a rocket that's going to do it, and they're out of control. And watching this thing happen, it's funny,
Yeah.
dark.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah.
fascinating, and you know, when an author keeps trying new things, when he can just keep turning up the same thing, that to me is so like none of his other books, except maybe a little like the Meteor.
Yeah.
And then there's this one. I apologize for the cover, but it's the only way it comes.
I
But
love that cover.
800 Leagues on the Amazon is it's really it's he does this kind of jungle adventure. He's a warmer Joseph Conrad, but
Yeah.
but it's like he wants to show he can do Jack London. He can do his book, The Green Ray. It's like E.M. Forster. This is not like Jules Verne. It's a subtle love story, and it's funny and light and a social comedy. The Green Ray is real. It sounds like a B movie science fiction thing, and it was so touching. It's innocent love, and it was really. I've heard of it. Now I realize why people take that one to their hearts. Green Ray is another really good one. I'm going to stop now, but I could
Yeah.
go on. There are so many good Jules Verne books that are ignored that it's a tragedy. And I'm glad I can tell you guys that, because I'm thinking maybe some of you hear me and will give these books a try. You'll thank me.
Yeah. I just have two other comments to make, and I guess we do need to wrap up. But two of the other things that are very apparent in your book, there is a very strong sense of gratitude in your book towards the translators who
Oh,
have led the way: Edward Baxter, William Butcher, Rick Walter,
the giants.
Gilbert Kravitz.
They changed our reading completely.
Yeah,
It changed it completely.
yeah,
They've
and
given
also
respect to Jules Verne.
the people, and including people in this room, who helped you get copies of some of the books that you couldn't find.
I remember I
So,
had two books I just could not find, and someone in the club wrote me and said, "What's your address?"
yeah,
And later I found out that he was the president of the club. It was
right,
Dennis, but I
right,
didn't know. All I
yeah,
knew is,
sitting right
how
across
is
from
this
you.
person trusting me with their precious books? But he did, and that's why I
Yeah.
got to have all of them represented in my book, thanks to him loaning them to me, someone he didn't know. Lucky
I
for
think
me.
it's a great book. It's a very courageous book. I mean, the struggles that you've had, to me, have been very titanic. Really, the things that you've had to struggle against, and you're very honest about how difficult it's been, and that is part of the story. Um, and but also just the information, the amount of information about Jules Verne, I think will be of enormous interest and help to anybody who is interested in him as an author. Um, and I really hope the book does well. Full disclosure, I'm narrating it for Bear Manor Media, so I have a personal stake in it doing well. Um, but
But I wrote it for you guys. I really
yeah,
wrote it just to urge you to not stop with the ones that you've read.
yeah.
Go on, try more of them. There are so many good ones. Your sense of who the man is will just grow and grow in the most beautiful way. Just trust me, do it.
I think I think that's good. I think we should stop there. But I thank you so much for your time, Nick. This was really good, and
A
it's a great
pleasure.
book. Thank you.
I was going to say, for
Thank you.